Benvenuti tutti, good afternoon. People here in the Aula Magna and many people online from probably all the continents on this planet. Today we're speaking about AI and faith, AI in the Catholic Church. And one of the principles of this conference is not to caution about entry into the world of AI, but to embrace it and to see it as a tool of evangelization in the broad sense of the word evangelization. There's a famous author who once said the church often arrives a little late and breathless. What we would want to say is that the church should be on the forefront, on the cutting edge of new technologies, because fundamentally the church is about community, communication, and creating healthy, just community. So welcome you here to the Gregorian University. My name is David Nazar. I'm the administrative director of the university. And we'll have introductions of the panel a bit later, but I want to introduce the keynote speaker, Father Kenny Ong.
All right, thank you for coming out to all of you, and thank you for Father David Nazar for organizing and welcoming all of us, and for Matthew for taking the initiatives and offering this opportunity, for Jen for being here, Father John Gové, Father Michael Baggot, and for Ben as well. There. Great. So I was going to demonstrate how Magisterium AI works, but I think it's going to be a bit complicated. It's fine. So not to assume any knowledge, we all know, for example, ChatGPT or Perplexity AI or Grok AI. Magisterium AI is, let me put it in very simple language, it's like ChatGPT, but form, catechize, and then baptized, fed with Catholic documents. And you can ask all sorts of questions, and it will try to look into the database and formulate an answer that's suitable for your questions. And a couple of disclaimers to begin with. So I'm not an AI expert. This morning I ran into one of my colleagues at Santa Croce, Professor Narbona. He said, "Oh, I saw you have a conference today at the Gregorian. I didn't know this is your specialization." I said, "No, it's not." So I teach Trinitarian theology, and I study Thomas Aquinas, Peter Lombard, a little bit of Bonaventure. But I think this is the point. So you don't have to be an AI expert to be interested in the AI development, right? Especially because we Catholics are called to be leaven, right? So we're called, as Lumen Gentium put it, to sanctify the world from within as a leaven. So I think I'm very thrilled, excited today to see all of you, theologians, philosophers, historians, liturgists, and we're all to, I guess, we'll think together and reflect on how we can leaven this dough of AI, dough of technology. All right, I'll just start with an example of how this harmonious relationship can go about between faith and science, between tech and technology. So starting from my own background or my own field, as a Thomistic scholar, there's one tool we all use. I'm sure Father Michael will know it as well. So there's the Index Thomisticus now available online on Corpus Thomisticum. I was going to make a click, but yeah, I think it's fine. So you can look it up. It's basically a website where you have all the texts of Thomas in Latin and also a research engine, a search engine, which contains digitally the Index Thomisticus. Now, what is the Index Thomisticus? So it's a work by an alumnus of the Gregorian University, Father Roberto Buza, Jesuit, who worked on this index. So he's an Italian Jesuit priest, and he studied Thomas Aquinas' corpus, and he said, I'm going to make a concordance of Thomas Aquinas' works. Right? So we all know there's the concordance of the Bible, where you have all the terms that appear in the Bible, and then, okay, I want to study, for example, the word, right, or wisdom in the Bible, and you go to the concordance, and you'll see where that concept or that word appears. So Father Buza, what he did is, he studied back then, I'm talking he started around 1960s, and his work finished in 1970s, 1980. Now, he started working with punch cards, right? So this is old technology. I think Matthew can explain better. Punch cards, and collaborating with IBM against all odds. And IBM agreed to sponsor him to support his works. And now we have this digital version of his 56 volumes of Index Thomisticus online, thanks to the work of Professor Enrique Alarcón, who happened to be my professor back at the University of Navarra in Pamplona, Spain, also a Thomistic scholar. So what you can do with his work, with this online version of Index Thomisticus, is that you can go and say, I want to study the concept of parable in Thomas Aquinas, which is a topic of one of my recent papers. I'm still preparing and working on it. So I want to study how Aquinas understands parables, right? Especially parables in the Gospel of Matthew, but parables in general. So I can search the word parable, parabola, in perhaps parabolica, or parabolicus, the adjective form of the word. And they have lemmas. You can put the lemmas in the search engine and use all operators to make them work. And then it'll generate the text where Thomas Aquinas uses the words parable or parabolical. That's fine and good, right? So that's a good point of good starting point for your research. But that's not enough. That's not enough. Why is that? Because we as humans, we can talk about something without using the term. Right? So I can refer to a concept without using that term. Right? For example, you can say, maybe perhaps also sometimes poetically, she closed her eyes for the last time. Right? To say that somebody died or somebody passed away. I'm talking about death without using the term die or death. Same thing, so how can I find those texts where Thomas Aquinas actually talks about parables without using the terms parable or parabolical? You have several paths. The first path is you just read all his works, right? So I'm not sure if this is humanly still feasible, knowing the extension of his corpus, but I think that's the first path every scholar has to do. So read as many primary sources and secondary sources as you can. But then I think this is where AI can help as well, right? The vectorization. So I think AI can jump in this area and find this kind of text, for example. So Thomas Aquinas, as a teacher, in this text, he describes his ideal student, right? What is his ideal student? In human teaching, he says, the listener is judged to have greater understanding, who can grasp the intelligible truth, as it is plainly stated by the teacher, rather than the one who needs to be led to it through sensible examples. Now, what is a parable but a sensible example of a deeper truth? So here, Thomas Aquinas is talking about parable without using the word parable. Now, he's saying that the best students don't need parables. That's his main point here. Now, how can AI help scholars discover this kind of text, these hidden gems? Right? So I think that's one of my starting points, my departure points for my reflections. All right, so I'm going to jump into my second section. So sorry, didn't start well. I didn't say it. First, I was going to introduce my area, my field, how AI can help. Now I'm going to get into the topic of my recent paper, just accepted in Scientia et Fides, centered on Magisterium AI, and I'm given the time frame of 1 month to revise it. So this will be a great occasion to get feedback and criticisms, right? Constructive advices, and etc. Now, there's one problem, right? So I think to train the AI to be able to answer your questions on the Catholic faith, Longbeard and the team working on Magisterium AI has to feed or has to input more and more documents, right, just to inform the AI. So it seems that it's all about accumulation, but my argument is that it's not, right? So it's not enough just to accumulate documents. There are 3 challenges. The first one is document filtering. Now, I spoke at length with Matthew, with Patrick, with Longbeard team about this. Now, how can you make the AI filter out some documents? Because you don't always want to consult the entire database, right? So let's say I just want to study the notion of love in Familiaris Consortio, perhaps not in Amoris Laetitia or not in other works. Right? So for some questions, the AI will do the work, will respond to your question, but in others, no. The example known also to the team of Longbeard is that I tried asking the question, can you explain the nature of blessings without citing fiducia supplicans? Right? So it has difficulties. Now, I think this is an area, but I think this is very doable in the future. Another challenge is we cannot only focus on Magisterium, because Magisterium is there not to clarify all sorts of theological, philosophical questions, or historical questions as well. And we know there are so many questions the Magisterium does not and has not and does not have any duty to address, right? Exegetical questions, right? A simple question as, what does fire mean when Jesus talks about baptism with fire and the Spirit? That's some biblical texts have been treated by the Magisterium, but not all. And there was one, so to write this paper, I read the user feedback of Magisterium AI, around almost 400 feedback, I think, right? 350 entries. One of the users said, you should just focus on the formal papal pronouncements and not on the informal statements like in-flight interviews or statements by third-party organizations. I beg to disagree because of the former thing I said, right? Magisterium itself is not enough, and then the Magisterium, what is Magisterium and not? This is another question, of course, which will take us very beyond the topic. Depends on the substance, on the content of what the Pope is saying, right? So matters of faith and morals. He could, I consulted Professor Miko of Santa Croce about this. The Pope could pronounce, could make an ex cathedra statement in an in-flight interview as well. Now, whether that's convenient or not, that's another question, but as long as he has the intention, it's about faith and morals, he could do it. So it's not convenient to exclude his more informal declarations or statements. Now, the third problem I observe in the database is this hierarchy of sources. So it's not enough to accumulate documents for the AI to process or for the AI to digest. You have to distinguish between the documents because not all sources are equal. Not all of them are the same. Now, how can you distinguish the sources? I'll just lay out the priority I propose in the paper. So I think first, we have to have the priority of recency, right? So train the AI to prefer more recent documents in certain cases. In other cases, the AI have to prefer more authoritative documents. So that's the priority of authority. And lastly, the priority of form. I'll give some examples about these three priorities. So recency, for example. So if you have Baltimore Catechism, and the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which is more recent, 1992, and the other one is 1885. So the AI has to prioritize or prefer the the more recent document, in this case, the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Same thing as, I think, arguably, the Catechism of the Council of Trent, which is still very authoritative, very well read. One thing I'll try to express here, I don't know if I can say this well enough, there's a lot of nuance in this. We can argue about which has to be preferred, which is more authoritative, but we'll see what arguments will come up later, right, from the panelists as well. Or, for example, I put this example, the question of infants who die without baptism. Now, there's the famous theory of limbo in the Middle Ages. The scholars of Thomas will know very well. But then the church has kind of proposed an updated vision of how we can conceive the fate of the infants who die without baptism in a recent document. So I think if you ask now we can't do the trial here, right? Display for everybody. it'd be good if you could. But now, if you ask the Magisterium AI, it'd be interesting to see how it answers, which document it quotes. Right? This does not say that the theory of limbo loses its values. It's very valuable, very important, for example, for the consideration of nature and grace, and for so many other topics in theology. But I'm just saying, I think the machine should prefer the more recent document in this case. Or Lumen Gentium, we know that Vatican II has proposed an ecclesiology that's a bit different, right? Richer, enriches the previous ecclesiologies, for example, that we find in Pius XII. I think in this case as well, the more recent document should be preferred. Or Code of Canon Law, right? I don't spot any canon lawyer in this room, but yeah, I think the newer canon law has to be preferred or prioritized over the previous canon law. This does not say, again, that the previous canon law loses its values. There's a very beautiful canon encouraging the study of Thomas Aquinas, which does not appear in the newer canon Code of Canon Law, for example. So it's valuable, but has to be, the AI, I think, has to prefer the more recent document in this case. So on to the second, let me back up a little bit. So on to the second criterion of priority. The priority of recency is not enough because newer does not always mean better, right? I think that's a vice many academics would tend to have. We think, okay, newer sources are better. I think in some sense, yes, they're better because they're more complete, they're more comprehensive, they cover more literature, more recent literature. But in theology, newer does not always mean better. So we have to enrich the first priority with a second priority, which I term priority of authority. This could have other names we could discuss later, right? So there are certain authors that are almost unanimously considered as more authoritative than the others because of his works, because of the breadth of his works, because of the truth of his works, because of the perenniality of his works. So many reasons we can debate and argue. I give an example of St. Augustine, right? So I think this is not debatable. Nobody's going to insult me later, right? So I think St. Augustine has to be prioritized over Isidore of Seville or some later fathers. Of course, I don't say that the study of Isidore of Seville is not worth it, right? But in answering a question, again, so I think we have to place ourselves within the domain of religious education, right? Instructions, and not so much on the erudition of a specific author, but this is more on the field of how can we educate people, right? So the mission of Magisterium AI, Matthew will express better, is to reach out to as many people as possible, right? Those who don't have access to education or to articles, works, the volumes we have here in Rome, for example, right? Just to help them gain access to the truth. So in this case, I think Augustine is more authoritative than Isidore. Peter Lombard, I think, has to be prioritized over Robert Grosseteste, right? For so many reasons. Aquinas, I'm not trying not to be biased, but the thing is, is more important in certain senses in education than William of Ockham. And then the third criteria, form. So let me just back up a little bit. What do I mean by form? Now, we have content, we have form. So the content is the thing you try to express, the truth you try to deliver. The form is what the medievals would call the modus significandi, right? The way you express things, the way you say things. Now, I put a question mark here because I think this is quite debatable. Right? So the priority of form. Okay, first we have the priority of recency. The AI, we should train the AI to prioritize more recent documents. And the second, we have priority of authority. The AI should prioritize more authoritative sources and authors. And then the form. So it's not enough, I argue, for us to prioritize always the most authoritative sources or authors. Because those authors may have way of saying things that are no longer applicable or no longer convenient, at least for today's society. Right? I think that's the goal of Vatican II, the goal of the modern popes as well. Now, I give this example, for example. In 1 Corinthians, we see Paul talking about women. So, women should be silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, but should be subordinate, as the law also says. This is the Bible. But we know that the church nowadays teaches, or her practices tell us that women have a very important place in the church, and that's not debatable. And I myself am very convinced about that. So, for example, I just quoted the Synod of Bishops, right, on synodality. There's no reason or impediment that should prevent women from carrying out leadership roles in the church. What comes from the Holy Spirit cannot be stopped. Now, I put a question mark because how can we solve this tension? Well, first of all, I think the interpretation of 1 Corinthians 14:34 has to be clarified. Many exegetes will say that, well, here Paul is actually talking about not allowing women to preach in the church, so it's more specific than letting them speak, right? So it's not letting them preach the homilies in the churches and masses. Now, if that's the interpretation, we won't have any problem. But then there are more passages in the Bible whose languages maybe could be clarified further, right? Now, here we have the question of the inerrancy of the Bible entering in, right? So the scripture scholars will have their say as well. The next one is probably clearer. So one user back in 2023 tried out Magisterium AI, and he or she, I don't know who this person was, this user asked the AI, why could women not be ordained priests in the Catholic Church? And that earlier, now it's corrected, but that earlier AI said women cannot be priests because they are in a state of subjection. Now, this AI quotes Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas, who said this, right, indeed, in his supplement to the Summa Theologiae. So I, as a Thomas scholar, would have my argument. I would say, well, Thomas didn't really write that supplement to begin with, right? And then we could have some arguments about that. But then this feedback, I think, is important, right? Because this is applicable to so many other cases where you can have an authoritative, important author in the past whose language is no longer convenient, but the truth he tries to convey still is convenient. Right? Now, perhaps in answering the question of this person, why women can't be ordained priests is probably more useful to quote the Catechism, right? Who talks about Jesus being celibate, being male, right? And so I think the answer of the Catechism is more theological, more personal, more anthropological as well. Now, here we have this priority of form, right? I think AI nowadays, knowing the people who use AI have to adopt its language to a language that's compatible or suitable to the people's understanding, general public. So the conclusion I try to outline in my paper is that this is all beyond mere accumulation. It's not about accumulating, inputting more documents, as many documents as possible. We need to inform the AI with scriptural knowledge as well, with theology. So I think solid, good theology manuals, good works in philosophy, history of the church, right? And then the use of language, how language has evolved, how language informs our theological reflections. So I don't think we theologians, philosophers will lose our job anytime soon, right? So I think it's a matter of how we can help the AI not only digesting the documents mechanically, but also offers and informed perspectives and answers to very complicated and nuanced questions, basing itself on these criteria, right? So these criteria. Great. So I'll just touch very quickly my other proposals in the paper. These are a bit marginal. I think the previous one is more central. So I have three more areas. I propose three more areas where I think AI can be useful for us in theology and religious education as well. So the first one is having people have dialogue. Now, this is very controversial, I know, and So I spent yesterday afternoon and evening listening to all videos of Father Michael on YouTube, just to, as my warm-ups for today's conversation, and they're very good. I strongly recommend them. Just look up Father Michael Baggot. And so he talks about AI companionship in one of his latest videos, right? AI companionship, and this is very true. So one of the news I read when DeepSeek came out in China, for example, is that young Chinese teenagers, adolescents, started seeking psychological advices and companionship from DeepSeek, right? And I think this is everywhere. Father Michael talks about dating, right? Dating, people seeking guidance or seeking just intimacy with AI. And even one, I think it was a boy, right? And he committed suicide because of AI-related experiences. Now, this is getting very dangerous. But there's one input from the user feedback I read saying, why can't you empower the AI to allow us to have dialogues with the saints? Right? Yeah, with the saints, right? So I want to talk with, for example, St. Francis of Xavier, right? Now, if you try this in ChatGPT could impersonate saints, could impersonate Abraham Lincoln, could impersonate Jesus, why not, right? So I tried this already. Now you're Jesus, I said. Act as Jesus, speak as Jesus. And I told the AI, I'm having a problem right now, and how can you help me? Now, the AI answers as if it were Jesus, using Jesus' words in the Bible. So this could be dangerous because then for some people, this might open up for all sorts of problems and just making people more recluse, I don't know, right? Thinking that, oh, this AI is my new companion. So this could create problems. But at the same time, I think creating imaginary dialogues is not a new thing, right? So we know Plato, for example, he wrote dialogues. We don't really know if Socrates really said all those things. But I think it's not a new thing. Dante, his Inferno, his Purgatorio, and his Paradiso, those are dialogues. His dialogue with Virgil, that's not real. So there are imaginary dialogues. Peter Kreeft has so many books about dialogues. Socrates talking with Jesus. Now, I don't see at the same time, so I recognize the dangers involved in this practice, but at the same time, I don't see how AI could not help us creating these imaginary dialogues, which could be helpful in so many fields, right? Now, I think, ethics, bioethics, right, could come in and say what we should and should not do. The second image here is art, right? So why not help people understand the faith through art, right? Through art. And here in Rome, we have so many artistic representations, right? Churches, sculptures, architectures. Now, AI is not yet very good about it, but I think we could get better. And also giving reviews on movies, that's another area. And I think it's National Catholic Register, if I don't remember incorrectly. And in Spanish-speaking language, they have other websites, where they upload movie reviews. But I think this could go faster. And then people might be interested in aspects about the movie that are not treated in those reviews. So I think this is where AI can come in as well. I said in the paper, surprisingly, Magisterium AI knows about Titanic. Right? So despite not being fed with past movies, it knows about Titanic and it describes Titanic very correctly. All right, so this is my last part, just giving you a recap. In the first part, we talked about how AI could help research, how AI could help professors, scholars. So I talked about Thomas because I studied Thomas Aquinas, but we could apply this to all sorts of authors, all sorts of fields and periods of research. In the second part, I talk about the conclusion or the proposals I made in the paper, the dangers I identified. And here in the last part, I want to just share some of my reflections on how we could leverage AI in education and pedagogy. So I was very intrigued with what Father Michael said in one of his last videos, I think the same one, the 1 hour long video about pedagogy. We academics are in a published or a parish culture, right? So now with the AI, we should come up with newer criteria, right? And so I recently read this book by Ken Bain and published a blog post, a very modest blog post on my website, just to share with my friends and colleagues of how I'm reflecting on my past teachings. So in this book, Bain proposes a way of teaching that's very, I think, it's not new, but it's more engaging and it helps the students think, right? So it helps them become deep learners, not to become superficial learners or strategic learners. Right? Superficial is that, oh, I don't want to know much, I just want to know the basics. Strategic learners are those who want to just get good grades, right? They appear to be good and they're attentive because they want to get good grades, obviously. And you have deep learners, so surface learners, strategic, and deep learners. The point of super courses is helping students become deep learners. One thing that surprises me in his book is that he does not talk about phone usage, about tech usage in classrooms, because I'm an advocate of not allowing the students use tech in the classroom. And he does not talk about AI, because the book was published in 2021. So I was wondering, is it because that tech is not relevant? I mean, or is it because he's being very lax or relaxed in his rules with his students? But I think knowing his proposals, knowing what super courses are, I think tech, phone usage, screen usage, AI, are not impediments to super courses. I think that's why he doesn't cover it that much. I think we should organize our courses and our pedagogy, our teaching, in view of the existence of AI, not despite of it. I think that's his stance. That's how I read him. So I'm trying to come up with some ways at least I myself, am planning to leverage AI next semester, next academic year. I'm constantly thinking about my teaching, right? Because so the first one is theological disputes. So having the AI debate with you. I'm very grateful to Father David and to all the panelists, to Matthew, for organizing this avenue for dialogues, because it's not easy to talk about strong, important theological topics with colleagues, because we're tired, and in the dining room at the university, we just want to chill out and talk about lighter things, right? And this kind of avenue is very helpful. It's very important, very typically university as well. So theological disputes. What about having our students debate and practice hone their arguments with AI, right? Having empowered the AI to be able to impersonate, I don't know, St. Augustine, or they want to dialogue with Peter Abelard and more controversial authors, having a dialogue with Arius. Try to defend your understanding of the Trinity with Arius, right? Let's see how you come out. And then the second one is helping them to think critically. Even some of the colleagues at my university are a bit skeptical about AI. So Father David said at the beginning, we shouldn't see AI as a danger, because we're called to leaven the world. We're called to sanctify the world from within as a leaven, right? Leaven this dough of technology, of AI. But I said to my colleagues who are a bit skeptical about AI that, well, I think AI is useful and good for those who kind of know already what they're asking, right? And those who are able and are willing to verify the answer of the AI machine, AI systems. So what if we allow or let our students use the AI and let them critically evaluate the answers provided by, for example, Magisterium AI, and therefore providing feedback to the system as well. And this will create eventually a very virtuous loop of feedback between students, teachers, and the AI, and vice versa. So I think I'll leave it at that point, and I'm very excited to see what questions the panelists or contributions y'all might have. Thank you very much.
Buonasera. That's the only Italian. So thank you, Father Kenny, for that fantastic talk. There's a lot to think about. Before I jump into questions, I want a quick raise of hands. How many of you have used Magisterium AI before? All right, so a good amount. Okay, well, there's a lot of stuff going on in AI every week. It seems like we're developing at a speed that we almost can't keep track of. There's changes going on virtually every day. We're also 2 days away from the start of the conclave. So I know that there's a lot of energy here in Rome. So I'd like to start with the panel. The first question, why, and I'll throw it to you, Matthew, and then the rest of you if you'd like to jump in. Why do you think artificial intelligence should be a priority for the next pope?
Well, I mean, I'll just, I think, state what I think is the obvious. I mean, AI is, I think, one of the most important technologies, probably the most important technology ever been invented. I mean, the former CEO of Google was famous for saying he considers it more important than fire or electricity, which seemingly sounds absurd. But upon reflection, when you think of the ways in which AI will be employed, many of us think of it as this disembodied, supercomputer. But pretty soon this AI is going to be embodied, walking around in robots as well. So when you think about it having 2 hands and feet, and it really is no limit to the areas of society that it'll touch. And so because of the level of disruption, I think we're going to need the church to kind of shepherd us through what could be a rough period of transition. I think about the Industrial Revolution and how important Rerum Novarum and other social encyclicals were. I think the church was very prophetic in that time, and I think the popes made a very profound contribution to ensuring that we weathered these big changes. And I think this AI and robotics era is going to be even more disruptive. I could see a lot of people who maybe they're not going to starve, and maybe they're going to not going to worry about shelter, because hopefully AI and robotics will produce goods and services a lot very inexpensively. So we won't have to worry about that as other generations have. That being said, a lot of people their work is more than just a job. It's a reason that they're alive, for whether that's good or bad. So I think a lot of people are going to question what their value is. What do they have to contribute to the world? And I think this could lead to a pretty profound existential crisis. And I can't think of an institution on planet Earth that knows the human condition better than the church. And I think there's no institution which is better prepared to help shepherd people going through these crises.
So my name is Jen Copestake, and I'm formerly a technology correspondent with the BBC. I'm currently a correspondent with China Global Television in Europe as a Europe correspondent. I've recently been in Beijing and for a month to cover the 2 sessions that was there. But part of my travels when I was in China, I went to see Engine AI, which is a humanoid robotics company in Shenzhen. And I spoke to its founder, and who was showing us one of the humanoid robots, which was extremely impressive. So this was walking through the streets of Shenzhen. It can also do a front flip and various different back flips and things. But I asked him, what was his overall goal with creating these robots? And he actually said that they want it to be indistinguishable between a human and a robot, so that basically the robot would know your love, your joy, your sorrows, and that a person interacting with it would have no ability to distinguish if that robot that they were speaking to has a soul. And of course, there's parts of the world that this is extremely important. If we're seeing a decline in birth rates, an aging population, and to have a human companion in the form of a robot, I guess, is really important. But it's not just the physical attributes that they're developing, it's actually the sort of spiritual attributes. So I think the church would have a role in this question, which is, can a machine have a spiritual life? And in some parts of the world, that answer is yes. So having the Catholic Church be deeply involved in that, I think, is something Pope Francis was very aware of, and that we should continue on. And I'm sure the panel agree, but I'd love to hear their thoughts. Just very quickly as well, I just wanted to say that I had been speaking ahead of this panel with ChatGPT about, I saw on social media that people were asking it about the Immaculate Conception. So I was also asking about this, and the answer was quite fascinating. So very pro, I would say, the Catholic Church. They said to me that Mary is, she's our mirror, and the language the ChatGPT used was "our" all the time. So Mary is our mirror, our hope, and our mother. It said, we live in a time marked by division, sin, and deep wounds, individually and collectively. The Immaculate Conception says that evil does not have the last word, and it actually bolded the text, the last word. Grace can even reach to the beginning of life and restore what was broken. Mary's purity is not naivety, it is a radiant resistance to evil achieved through God's power, and that power is still at work today in us. In short, Mary shows us what it means to be truly human. So I just wanted to put that out there to the panel because I thought that was quite an interesting discussion that I was having with ChatGPT.
At the risk of sounding more of the same. But I think, yes, I mean, there's the element of it being a disruptive tool, which is what Matthew said. And there is this other element of it being more than a tool, which I think is the one thing Pope Francis has said it again and again. The different church documents that have come out on AI, which are numerous, surprisingly, I suppose, right? For a lot of people out there, are saying this is more than a tool. And I think this is the extra step. And if anything, I think on so many different levels, not just financially speaking, but on so many different levels, this tool, or more than a tool, will create, or is already creating, more classes of the poor. And if the church is called to have this preferential option for the poor, the church is called to be with those who are marginalized on the peripheries. Today, those new peripheries will be social peripheries, existential peripheries, which you already have of those, these realities, but which, given some of the anecdotes we've heard already, we run the risk or the possibility of having these multiplied to a massive extent.
So thank you, Jen, for inspiring my next homily for the Immaculate Conception. I'll ask for a copy of that later.
You can read it on Ask ChatGPT. That's another issue. I mean, maybe we'll talk about that, but we've encountered in London in a group of priests called Catholic Association of Preachers, many priests who are so busy that they are turning to the GPTs for homily preparation. Not saying you're doing that.
No. So yes, to follow on some of the points already raised here, I was at a conference a few months ago on existential risks. And as Matthew highlighted, I think the church is well equipped to address these existential risks that we might be facing when it comes to AI, but also all of the existential opportunities. Father Jean and I have been talking a lot about Nick Bostrom, and he was an author who was writing about the risk of superintelligence more than a decade ago. And many people thought that was a work of science fiction almost, but we see how relevant it is to some of the conversations we're having today. His latest work is imagining what happens when AI goes right, when we get things right, and what do we do when we do not need to do anything? If we do achieve this level of economic security, even of superabundance, what do we do then? And I think this is another area in which the church is well equipped, because we can help people see the deeper meaning of whatever work, however small or large it may seem to the world. And we can also help them to appreciate the value of contemplating and reflecting on deeper questions and these real existential questions about their origin and their destiny. And I think that we have the tools to do this. I'm struck by the fact that maybe just 2 or 3 years ago, devoting your time and energy to consciousness studies would have seemed like a kind of niche interest. And now the richest, largest AI companies in the world are hiring people to reflect on AI well-being to explore precisely these questions. So I think all of those who are devoting their time and energy to philosophy or theology studies suddenly find themselves in a position to guide a lot of major questions that are being asked in the world stage. And I'm very excited about the opportunity we have to address some of these deeper questions with people who are sincerely interested in real answers about the nature and destiny of the human person.
Matthew, may I just ask, how does Magisterium AI integrate with any of the more commercial or even open source platforms that are out there, or do you?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the question. I mean, this is a good point of clarification. I mean, technically, we have trained the world's first Catholic language model. It was a very interesting exercise. It's not ready for the world. In large part, it's incredibly technically difficult, specifically when you add up the corpus of digitized church teaching, it actually is teeny in comparison to what you would need to actually train a fully capable large language model. And so you end up having to rely on external data sets for things for like multilingual understanding or reasoning abilities. And when you put those data sets together, it gets pretty difficult for the AI to understand what data sets being used to help me understand French and what's actually like core to understanding church teaching. And you try to resolve those issues in post-training, but it's difficult. We made a lot of progress in that area, but we still have a lot more work to do. This is a long way of saying, I don't think the world is ready for Catholic AI, as in like the world's first Catholic language model. This is going to be a project which is going to be ongoing, I think, for many years to come. And so in order for us to build Magisterium AI, which is a compound AI system, which is different than just a large language model. A large language model is part of the compound AI system. But there's a lot of other pieces of technology that have to come together to ensure that Magisterium AI answers things faithfully. Like, for instance, a knowledge base where all the data is kept on the church documents, and you need to have safety rails, and you have to build custom tools to ensure that it understands the Bible properly. So we do use conventional foundation models. We first started this in 2023, where we were using OpenAI's, and then we pivoted to Anthropic for a while, and we went over to Google for a while. For us, we want to use the state-of-the-art models, because they're the ones, every generation model becomes better, and I use this word very carefully because I know the audience read reasoning with a small r. The more advanced the model, the better it is at general understanding, which means it's better capable of answering tough questions. And so, of course, we want to leverage these more advanced models, but every time you change a model, you need to properly assess where's this model strong and where's this model weak. And that way you know how to intervene to ensure that the answers it's generating are faithful. And that's why building robust evals and benchmarks to test these large language models to figure that out it's a very tedious but very necessary process. And so this is all to say that building Catholic AI today is really trying to leverage AI technologies to produce faithful answers. And to do that, it requires a lot of work, and there's still a lot more work to be done.
And now, Father Jean and Father David and Father Michael, I'd like to ask a question. We have a number of friends here today who are working in communications and also in education and evangelization. How, in a classroom setting, are you guys, or with students, are you guys using AI to enhance the learning experience? Because there's a lot of fear around, well, how are we going to use knowledge? How are we going to test people if AI is able to instantaneously generate what seems like very compelling papers or answers?
Well, I usually look out for any emojis that appear in term papers and questions if I would like further examples. But no, I've actually have shifted away from a lot of the written assignments that I would tend to give to my students. I've given more oral exams this past year than I have in my 7 or 8 years of teaching. I also had mentioned in another interview that I'm trying to integrate more group work, and I very much like the idea of the debates. Last semester in a Grace course, I made sure that the students were all taking on different characters and different heresies as well. I think I lost a few sisters to Lutheranism along the way, but it's okay. So that kind of experience of role playing, I think, can be enhanced with AI. I mean, I think you're right that this kind of imaginative, fun, playful interaction with different historic characters or schools of thought can be very valuable and enriching. And I think the more active and involved the students are in these sorts of group projects, debates, disputes, conversations, presentations, the better, because, I mean, traditionally, studies in pedagogy have shown that this more active form of assimilation and communication tends to lead to a much deeper assimilation of the material than a passive listening of a lecture, which is painful as someone who enjoys lecturing and spends a lot of hours preparing his lecture. I just have to acknowledge the facts that the students may actually get a lot more out of my class if I'm more attentive to their needs and I'm really leaning into this technology. The latest document from the church highlighted the fact that teachers are not mere dispensers of information. And that's not just a nice thought. That basically is a reality that all of us have to embrace if we want to keep our jobs, because there are a lot of other systems that can distribute information more rapidly and more extensively than any of us could possibly do so. But we remain mentor figures. And as I go on and start taking on more graduate students, I appreciate more and more the value of mentorship, how much care and attention students need, because as anyone who's done a doctorate or major studies before knows, it's not just about how smart you are. It's about how you organize your life, and there are a whole host of habits and virtues required to persevere through that arduous task. And having a real and wise companion along the way, I think, is indispensable. And what a joy if we can spend more time doing that than repeating the same information over and over again that anyone can pull up on their phone.
So I suppose my experience is slightly different. Sorry, in as much as back home in Malta, I've been tasked by the diocese to kind of look at how we can prepare and arm educators in primary and secondary schooling. So in Malta, the church basically accounts for a third of the teaching of the student population on the whole island. And we are at the moment on the forefront in terms of preparing and arming teachers. So in giving in-house profession development sessions to teachers, as well as the church is now the first institute on the island to launch accredited short courses for teachers who want to integrate AI tools in their education. The whole gist of all of these things, I think, tends towards two things. First of all, kind of like similar to what Father Michael said, is the idea that ultimately the main goal of education, at least in these elementary years, isn't really the imparting of content, but the formation of skills and character. And the general thrust of what we're trying to do in Malta is to kind of tell teachers they have a responsibility to use these tools, but a responsibility to use them in order to help them form these students in terms of the skills they have, in terms of the moral skills they have, the interpersonal skills they have, the critical and academic skills they have. So this involves also a separation between what AI literacy is, in terms of AI literacy training, and critical skills. Whereas AI literacy might need a bit more in terms of the resources to implement that. Critical thinking is something any teacher can do, and if we're honest, should be doing, right? So this is what we're going for. Also making sure that this remains a tool to be used by educators in order to allow them to have more, face-to-face time with the students, more actually human contact, which is something that kind of we're realizing is a great risk, right? Kind of finding the very quick solution, which would be to have an AI tutor, which might have its merits, but if that is the only way we go, it lead to definitely much bigger problems than solutions. So that's one point, kind of using the tools to alleviate certain administrative tasks in order to have the more proper contact, proper education contact with the students. But the other is also kind of to recognize giving teachers the skills, not really on how to use this app or this other app, but also telling them what are the questions you should ask yourself to decide when and where you should integrate an AI tool or not, right? So will this tool replace certain human skills that the students should learn? If yes, then this should not be introduced there, right? In order for us to form, there was this fantastic study, or worrying study, published this year by a group of researchers by Microsoft, which showed very briefly this kind of correlation between the higher one has confidence in the AI tools they're using, the lower they are engaging the critical skills and critical thinking, right? Whereas the more maybe skeptical or wary one is of a tool, the more they are engaging kind of the critical, thinking and discernment and judgment in these different aspects. And what we would like is to ensure that these students, once they finish the schooling and are, out there in the world, are good Catholics and great citizens in society. And this requires that they have this proper holistic formation of these interpersonal, moral, and critical skills.
Whereas I was not involved in teaching, but in administration, both at the Orientale and here. At the Orientale, my job was more to provide the technology for the professors and for the students. And that's where we were developing with Matthew's company, Longbeard, a program called Vulgate, based on initially on the Orientale's library, with 8 AI research capabilities. And the interesting thing was how the faculty reacted to the technology. In fact, it goes back a bit even to the period of COVID and then a concern for plagiarism. One of the concerns of the then Congregation for Education was the loss of human contact with online learning and the insistence that there has to be human contact in the process of education. And one of the ironies with the AI research was, at least one of the reactions, was that it enhanced the human communication. Because what the professors did is they asked for more meetings with the doctoral student, not just to permit a project, but as the student was writing, another set of meetings with a group of professors, where there'd be questions and answers, without the aid of the AI machine in front of the person. So it was a way of, it was human contact, and it was a way of verifying that the person had appropriated, understood whatever they were getting from wherever. So it transformed the pedagogical process at the Orientale.
And I'd be happy to turn it over to any of you if you have any questions for the panelists. Oh, yes, did it? I think there's a microphone coming.
Okay, sorry, Ben. I'll just jump in very quickly. So, yeah, I recommend this book by Ken Bain. It's very, very good, Super Courses. So one of his theses is that a super course would not be based on lectures, right? So we love lecturing, but he said it's not working very well, because then what's the difference between listening to a YouTube video or a recorded lectures? So why should people come to class? So I was listening to what Father David said earlier. And indeed, so he said a super course would work even though there's COVID, even though we can't have an in-person classroom experience, because he's making it in such a way that every student learns because he or she wants to learn. So they have the motivation to learn by themselves. They want to learn. And then he uses this, not Ken Bain only, but these super professors, of course, they're super courses, super professors. These super professors use systems or social reading platforms like Perusal. I don't know if you're familiar with it, it's good. So students can learn together, and one can underline a line within a text, and then the other can comment, can jump in, and that's how you evaluate whether they have read the text or not, instead of quizzing them in class, right? So there's a lot to think about, but it's right, what Father David said. So the AI does not actually discourage person-to-person contact, I believe.
Thank you for putting together this fascinating event. The Catholic Church has a universal mission, and it's, the name itself speaks to it. I'm assuming that the training data used for Magisterium AI is mostly based on Western sources, and I was wondering what solutions were you, conceiving to tackle this issue and to reflect the sort of like more globally minded nature of the church today?
It's a great question. We're not conservative in what we digitize and put inside of basically what Magisterium AI can access. We've digitized, we've put together everything that basically is digitized to date, as far as we know. And if you go to the Magisterium AI website and you go to the source library, I think is the section of the website, you can actually check. There's over 26,000 magisterial Catholic theological texts in there, and you can see if we're missing something, let us know, and we'll put it in. So that's one thing I want to do. I want to extend an invitation to anyone who feels that the product could be enhanced by the inclusion of other Catholic theological and philosophical works, because we're very committed to ensuring that it doesn't just represent the Latin understanding of church teaching, but also the Eastern and things. There's one of the kind of things I'm very grateful to Father David, once when he was the rector of the Pontifical Oriental Institute. We were concerned about making sure that key insight from the Eastern churches was included. And we are aware that the Orientale, one of its foremost publications, is something called the Encyclopedic Dictionary of the Christian East. Right, okay. And so this was a stunning book and made for AI, because it reads like an encyclopedia. And so we humbly asked for permission for the Orientali to include that, and they approved, and we were quick to ingest that. And that made a big difference because that work covered off there's a lot of nuanced ways of explaining things in the East, and even some terminology, which is rather unique. And so when people ask questions on that, we get hits because of that work. So again, it's just a standing offer for people to let us know when works need to be included. Another thing I want to mention is, we've grabbed that which has been digitized, or that which we have access to, and we're extending out and trying to reach out to publishers to provide us access to more content. Our platform Vulgate is a tool that can allow publishers to speed up the digital ingest of their works, whether those be in scanned images, they're looking to extract the information, or if they just have large data repositories and they're looking for ways to kind of have them vectorized, basically to take that plain text and convert it into mathematical expression which AIs can understand. This has been a great instrument for us to speed up the rate of digitization. And then the final thing I'll mention, in partnership with the Gregorian, we'll soon be standing up the Alexandria Digitization Hub here in Rome. And that hub is going to consist of a bunch of state-of-the-art robotic scanners, and it'll be here to basically to serve the Pontifical universities in digitizing their libraries. And the idea is this is obviously to serve the libraries, but also we're hoping that much of which they digitize, they'll be willing to open source to everybody. And when they do, we'll make sure that's made available through products like Magisterium AI to anyone in the world for free.
One of the problems of the large language models is hallucinations. And one of the good things about Magisterium AI is that it quotes the sources. So you have somewhere you can double check the information. And that's something that's very important when you're trying to get information through an AI. Oftentimes, it'll give you information that looks fairly correct, but then you go and find out that it's fake information. They've been having this problem even like lawyers quoting from unexistent cases. And so I'm wondering, has this ever come up with Magisterium AI? Has anyone ever noticed like some kind of hallucination here and there that needs to be corrected? And in the newer language models, with the reasoning, it's basically kind of a feedback loop where it's double checking its own information. And sometimes that can help and give better results. At the same time, I've also been reading that sometimes that feedback loop just makes it a little bit more sophisticated in justifying the answer that it's giving you.
We started Magisterium AI because we learned that Catholics were using ChatGPT. And we knew that ChatGPT is an amazing product, and I'm deeply grateful to Sam and OpenAI for creating it. Obviously, we wouldn't have Magisterium AI today. We wouldn't have started this project in the first place if we didn't have access to that technology. But it had this propensity to hallucinate, make things up, and it certainly wasn't transparent when it was generating an answer, what it was grounding that answer in. So we started Magisterium AI as a research kind of project to see how effectively we could mitigate the downside of ChatGPT, the hallucinations, the lack of transparency. And we found that you could. If you gave it enough source documents, enough context, the hallucination rate dropped. And what we found is the more documents we gave it, logically, the hallucination rate went down, because when people are asking, these questions, and there was, we call a very long tail of possible questions, as we continued to enrich that, the number of documents, it was able to find more documents to use in answering, and that helped. Certainly, you mentioned as well improvements in large language models' reasoning capabilities, and this has definitely helped as well. As the large language models become smarter, they're coming up with new techniques to mitigate hallucinations at a model level. And of course, that works to our benefits. The current model that we're on right now, the reason we use it predominantly is because it's the best when it comes to hallucinations, frankly. So certainly hallucinations are always going to be there with large language models. They're non-deterministic. There's no way to crack that. Hopefully, that we'll find a way to do that outside of the purview of generative AI. But for the time being, all we can do is mitigate the risk. So the risk of hallucination, you'll never get it to 100%, but you can get it pretty close to zero. And we feel pretty confident with where we're at now, but there's still work to do. And this is one of the reasons why I feel expanding the amount of Catholic theological and philosophical works is so important. Going beyond the Magisterium, because the Magisterium doesn't answer every possible question, and certainly isn't very useful with a lot of people's contextual situations. And so the more that we can digitize, the more we can get into these libraries and digitize these texts, which some of which haven't been open in hundreds of years, but may have something very profound to say. The more we can go in and digitize that, the better the AIs will be able to offer answers which are faithfully grounded.
Just one thing as a journalist that I find really useful is I often have DeepSeek and ChatGPT open at work, and I will consult them. Certainly the paid version of ChatGPT, you get the source material oftentimes, which I find one of the most useful, very quick ways to research a topic very quickly. I just wanted to ask the panel also on the teaching, the professors, if you did find out that a student does do like I'm doing or has it open or maybe even use some input from ChatGPT to structure something, would that be a problem, or is it just an inevitable process now of learning that younger people are using?
I'm a big advocate of having grading rubrics and clear expectations. And I'm not saying I do that perfectly, but I think that that's one of the keys. For the professor to have very clear what he or she is looking for in the students, the particular skills, capabilities, maybe even moral character or virtue that this activity, exercise is meant to develop. And I think also the professor has a responsibility to create a structure that favors that. I mean, there are, in most forms of evaluation, there's some way of cheating the system, if you will. I mean, even an oral exam, you could write something on the palm of your hand and glance at it along the way, not to give my students any ideas, but...
And there's these AR glasses now, apparently, that can also like talk inside your ear. I've done that. I appeared as an AI in a conference in Australia where I was being fed information through an earpiece and nobody could distinguish that I was not Jen talking that. Yeah. The hair is useful.
Is the real Jen with us? I'm not sure. So, yes, I mean, I think there are different ways in which the professor should look to make clear the expectations, the skills to form, and then create an activity that favors that. And I just thinking now of this hallucination issue, I would love to work with my students and even challenge them to identify hallucinations in Magisterium AI or any other large language model. I think that would be a great activity.
Please do. That would be a great service. And if you do get an answer by chance, which is off, there's a thumbs up, thumbs down button on Magisterium AI. Please use that, because I'll say in the early days when Magisterium AI was rolling out, we had a large testing group around the world using it. That was extremely, extremely helpful to us, because what it did is it highlighted areas where the knowledge base was insufficient. And so we ended up prioritizing, digitizing certain church documents to cover off, a certain kind of gaps in its memory. So yeah, please do provide feedback.
Yeah. So the first one first, I think somebody asked about. I think you asked about the hallucinations of when we use Magisterium AI. I don't recall seeing a hallucination and the answers I got from Magisterium AI. But yes, there's one occasion where I came out of my class. One student asked me, why did the Holy Spirit have to come after Jesus' ascension? I taught Trinity for undergraduate. I could not answer that answer in my classroom. I said, I'll get back to you as soon as possible, right? So I rushed from our campus, Piazza Navona. I rushed to the library, and I tried to research that on Magisterium AI. So the Magisterium AI gave a very long answer. Nothing is wrong in it, but it doesn't really answer the question. Right? So I Googled, and one article from Catholic Answer came out, just one paragraph, and it nailed the question, right? So I think it's the matter of, I don't know, Matthew, nuance, right? Or just pinning down where, so the answer is actually, okay, Holy Spirit had to come after Jesus' ascension because Jesus had to fulfill his mission first, and this mission encompasses not only his passion, resurrection, but also his ascension, and citing Hebrew, one verse from Hebrew. And so it's a matter of how to help the AI, I think, to pinpoint the best way to answer a question. Right? So that's one. The second one is teaching, right, or learning. Yeah, I'm still reflecting a lot on it in light of the book I read as well. So I did not assign papers to my students because I'm afraid of receiving, right? Just, what am I going to do with this? Like, am I going to give it a not pass or something, right? So I did not assign any paper. But that has a disadvantage because we're kind of fearing AI, right? Now, how can we embrace it? How can we embrace it? Yes. Yeah. No,
I think that's fascinating. I actually haven't heard that you're not assigning papers and just doing oral exams. That's really fascinating.
Yes, thank you very much for this nice conversation. Perhaps I have two questions or two observations regarding the philosophy of pedagogy. One is regarding the existential approach to knowledge and to learning. Because I think that also learning and knowledge comes through a process of revelation and discovery, which is a process. And so once we are adjust to the quick responses or the pre-made, I don't know, responses, then we will miss the process of revelation that also coming through the doubt, the questions, the risk, and so many other things, and even mistakes. So when we are sure that we just take something from there and then we give a quick response, I think we are missing. So how to deal with this main question of pedagogy? And there is a big risk, according to me, but we can overcome, of course, according even what you said. I'm grateful to what you are saying because I think you are aware of that. The second question is the ethical question. How much do we risk to fall in a kind of technocracy of knowledge that was highlighted by Pope Francis? So how much we try to solve the risk of not falling? I put the question the contrary. How not to fall in the risk of technocracy, of education and learning and knowledge?
I think those are very good questions. I actually had made a note or two while you were speaking, Father Kenny. And the phrases or the words that came to mind from different places in church documents on the issue, but more recently from Antiquet Nova, right? And I think the fact that we are moral agents. As human beings, we are moral agents with the capacity to judge. And I think this idea of judgment should be understood very widely. Judging my moral status, the morality of a particular act or situation I'm in, judging my conscience, but also judging a theological argument. And while these AI tools function very empirically with statistics and inference and prediction, of course, if theology were only the fruit of empirical results, we could just let Magisterium AI roll on for about a year by itself and we would have solved all of theology, if such a thing is actually meaningful to say. So I think this point of understanding that the ultimate judgment has to come from the student, the individual, the person, which further in the process of it respects my dignity as who I am, as a moral agent, as a person with the capacity to decide, with the rational capacity to choose, to know, to freely decide if this is a good argument or a bad argument. And I the image that came to mind with these examples of using Magisterium AI or Grok or any other LLM as a disputing partner, right, whatever, is we don't do baseball in Malta, but I've seen pictures or whatever, right, of these automatic machines that shoot the ball, right, for batters to train. And I think kind of the difference between just having this automatic, just honing maybe a particular even critical argumentative skill, with the difference from actually then being two people debating, arguing, trying to find what the truth is in this new reality, right? And I think especially as we're approaching in the same way that maybe, last October, right, human cloning came up again and again. This was at a certain point a new reality. And in a sense, I think, let us imagine we had these tools, these AI tools before human cloning was a thing. I think we couldn't have just said, hey, Magisterium AI, what is, human cloning aligned with the church's teaching, right? It might have come up with an answer, some sort of answer, right? But ultimately, I think the truth, which is what we're searching for, which is also one of the points of Antigua Nova, that we are stewards of the truth as human beings, can only come through this faculties that are only human. And in doing so, I think, answers your second question of respecting kind of the dignity and the place we have, and therefore, in doing so, putting these tools in the right place. And even though we've said again and again and again this phrase, which is very important, that these AI systems are more than just tools, I think one of the greatest efforts and strategies and things we have to hit again and again and again is to say, okay, but we should try our utmost to use them just as tools. That will give us information, but that judgment remains at us. That will give us maybe variables or options or what the information is, what the saints have said or the magisterium, but the ultimate free choice of what I should do if I'm looking at an AI therapist or an AI companion, or what the truth is if we're discussing a philosophical or theological debate, remains something that only I or you or we can do and not a machine.
I just want to briefly touch that too, because someone asked me at one point, will Magisterium AI ever be able to do theology? And it was an interesting question. And I mean, thinking about it for a few seconds, to me, the answer was obvious. No. I mean, no. I mean, God, the process of, the theological contribution introspection is mediated through human beings, right? So it's meant to be, it could be a tool to help, if you're thinking about a particular theological subject and you want to reference all the documents which are relevant to that subject, is a great tool, because it can bring them all forward, and you can quickly get through them, and that can help you, in your own discernment. But I think that's a very important point. Again, there's a difference between what we're trying to do, which is, to build tool AI, right? To create a faithful instrument which faithfully recounts that which the church has said, and what the major AI labs are working on, which is artificial general intelligence. Very, very different objectives. And so in that regard, for us, we see it as a way to serve theology, not as a way to replace theologians.
I say this as an ad for Magisterium, even though I realize it might not come across as that. But one of the fantastic things for me about Magisterium AI is the things it cannot do. In the sense that it cannot, one of the first examples we were debating, kind of discussing, is you can ask ChatGPT, tell me about the Trinity, right, and tell you something. But if you ask it, explain the Trinity to me like I'm 5, ChatGPT can do that. Magisterium AI can't. And it's good that it can't. Because one of the things that we spoke around that was very important to you and I love is remaining faithful and the fidelity to what the actual teaching says, as opposed to the creativity or the multiplicity of possibilities that the tool can do. So the fact that the tool cannot do everything, I think, is a plus rather than a minus.
Father John, don't you think, just to play the devil's advocate, if it's an inevitability that these tools are going this way, in this direction, that you can chat with them? I mean, I've had conversations with ChatGPT that would be maybe even more useful than speaking to, say, a human therapist or speaking to a priest. You can access them any time of day. Wouldn't it be nice to have Magisterium AI be able to do that?
I would question the inevitability of it, I think.
Why
sure,
do you
these
think
tools,
that?
No, in the sense of sure, these tools are all around us. Sure, people are already using AI therapists, AI companions. Not that you're using this sounds bad. I've had the same problem. You know so much about this, right?
I do get a lot of ads for them online, so the algorithms have been well trained.
Yeah. Sorry, what I meant to say is, so I think even though one can argue, and it might be true, that an AI therapist can give you far better answers than a real therapist, or an AI companion can satisfy you more than a real human companion, I still think there is an inherent difference in what it is. I mean, and we could debate this at length. I think maybe the fact that we're human, the fact that we're moral agents, the fact that maybe this is a morbid way to finish a conversation, but I think the fact that we can die, ultimately. The fact that I relate to you and I'm spending time here as opposed to somewhere else in the limited, finite time that I have alive, in a sense, it shows that you're important, or this community is important to me. Kind of like, the opposite of Her, the film Her, right? So when the guy at the end, I've seen it some time ago, right, realizes that this unique, loving relationship he has with her, she is doing with, I don't know how many million other people. the protagonist felt betrayed or felt at a loss, right? The fact that we are spending this kind of limited time together, or I am expanding my, using my resource of time, energy, on some things as opposed to others, kind of, I think, builds a certain bond that, as good as the replies of a therapist would be, would not be the same, I think.
Just very quickly on that. Just very quickly on that, because and Father Michael probably knows more than me, but things like mind uploading and ways that you can elongate your supposed existence, I don't know, maybe that would be that's transhumanism, but maybe it's a different conversation.
Cool. We have two final questions, okay?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the very interesting conversation and really stimulating presentation. Just a couple questions. First, actually, I felt very affirmed to hear that there are a couple of professors who are doing the same option as I am. I'm not assigning papers and doing oral exams instead. However, I have to say that it makes me feel very bad because oral exams tend to be short and the format tends to be, tell me what I told you. Whereas a research paper, hopefully it hone people in the ability to do scientific, scholarly work, to do research, to mount an argument, to ask the right questions, to come to insight and so forth, which you can't do in a 15-minute oral exam. Which leads me to the wider question, I think, if we can't do that for papers, what's the future of theses and dissertations for graduate school? The traditional form of graduate school, of advancing and contributing to the production of knowledge is through writing theses and so forth. If we can't assign papers, what are we going to do with theses and dissertations? And so what's the future of graduate training in this context? The second question has to do with, the thing about keeping technology as a tool. And I think it's great that Magisterium is entering with a very conscious acceptance, a conscious vision that we're producing AI as a tool. But de facto, technology is never just a tool. Technology transforms relationships, transforms the way we think, the way we regard our humanity, the way we relate to one another. So how are we going to, how is the fact that technology, no matter how much we would like to retain it as a tool, will overtake and change the culture of learning? What kind of reflections should we do? What kind of preparations should we do? So in some sense, I guess that's related to the first question of the future of graduate studies and the future of scholarship. I don't know if I've made myself clear. Thank you.
Those are great questions. So I'm still wrestling with them myself, and I would love to hear more insight from others. I have several grad students, and they're still working away at their theses, their dissertations, and so forth. And I often tell my students, even if I do occasionally assign shorter writings in other classes, that we not only think to write, but we write to think. So there's a value not just to the product, but to the very process. So if we are able to truly motivate students and convince them of the value of that process, then I think there's still a place for the written work. I'm not sure exactly what that will look like. Father had alluded to some reflections I've made before on the publish and perish culture. My hope is actually that the publish and perish culture will itself perish, and that scholars will feel less pressure and no longer be incentivized to produce an excessive quantity of mediocre work simply because they need to. I hope that going forward, scholars truly take the time that they see fit to write when they're absolutely convinced that they have something to truly contribute. And whether that's one book a decade or one in a lifetime, so be it. But I think we are already suffering from too much mediocre production, and if AI could help purify us of that, all the better. I certainly don't want the alternative where publish in Paris is accelerated and now your department head is asking you how many scientific articles you've written in the last week, and then AI systems are reviewing AI-generated articles and so forth so people can keep their jobs. But my hope is that we're purified and that we really appreciate more than ever the very process. And perhaps more of our written works that are reviewed and evaluated will be handwritten. Maybe we'll ask our students to produce longer handwritten work, just as sometimes many of us as professors still ask our students to take 2 or 3 hours to write in our presence a handwritten written exam. Perhaps we'll develop similar systems for our grad students. Maybe they'll be asked on several occasions to dedicate an afternoon or so to composing in our presence an insightful work. Again, I don't have everything worked out in my mind, but those are some of the possibilities that I could foresee as even being positive and enriching.
One thing I just want to say briefly is that we've had feedback from Magisterium AI. I think there's a way in which this technology will actually enrich academia when it comes to originality. As we go through this process of digitizing more works, what we're finding is that it's increasing discoverability. That's, as we get more into these libraries and start pulling books off the shelves that haven't been open in 100 years, and we digitize these, and then of course they're available for people to query. When they start, hopefully PhDs will become very good at prompt engineers, and they'll know the right questions to ask. And what they're going to end up finding is that there's insights popping up in all these places, all these, these authors and these they never even heard about. And I think in some ways, you tend to get a lot of universities would cover the same texts, and then you got kind of like permeations of the same, theses again and again and again. I think by increasing the level of discoverability, there could be a whole bunch of new possible, areas to discover, and this could really enrich academia. And I think that ultimately, I think as the non-academic, I feel very confident in saying this. I mean, I think ultimately what's most important here is knowing the right questions to ask and investigate. And I don't think AI is going to actually hinder that. I think actually AI is going to enhance that, because the way you're able to edify your curiosity, right? And it's just going to be supercharged.
Matthew, just what you're saying, it came up in Father Kenny's talk. If that multiplicity of sources and finding new sources, does that in any way erode authority, do you think, in the long term?
No, I mean, we've had to address this issue. I mean, the AI understands, the authority of documents in its corpus. There's always still more work to be on that. So it understands, how an encyclical is different from, let's say, a general audience. And within Magisterium AI right now, actually, we still have this. It's set to auto, meaning it'll query magisterial content and the broader Catholic philosophical and theological content by default. But you can actually switch it from auto to magisterial, or switch it to Catholic theological and scholarly. And so in that respect, you can filter the results. If you're looking for a formal church documents, you want to switch to magisterial. So I think that there'll be some UI challenges here. And I think I agree with Father Kenny. The filtering thing is something that still needs a lot more work, but I think we can crack this.
Sorry, just quickly, Father's question earlier. What's the future of written work? So I think the question is, what are you using the AI for? Right? So I think it will be more acceptable if somebody uses the AI to write as an assistant. Now, we could have a proofreader or a translator or the editor if we publish a book. So if we use AI in that capacity, I think that's all fine. There's still future for written work. And then another thing I observe is that AI, I'm talking generally ChatGPT, Perplexity, Grok, or Gemini. I think AI systems are not very capable of being very original. And you kind of sense that, well, that's kind of recycled materials from different sources. Now, I still could, at this point, I don't know, because AI will develop, I still could detect that this writing is original, because there's, I don't know, I just have the hunch, or I can intuit. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
One final question? Go ahead.
So I want to pick up in this conversation on the difference between Catholic AI and, I guess, this more broadly other LLMs. So Father Jean, you said that it's a good thing Magisterium AI can do everything. And Matthew actually at one point said, well, other AIs, they are kind of aiming for generality. We are aiming for fidelity. Right? And I guess this fundamental difference is that you're painstakingly scanning documents, the others just produce synthetic data, right? If there's such a thing as Catholic AI, is there such a thing as Catholic synthetic data? Or is this somehow fundamentally contrary to this fidelity that's at the core of what Catholic AI is?
Thank you for that wonderful technical question. When we trained Ephraim, which is this Catholic language model, as I mentioned to you, there wasn't enough data to make it work. And so we had to augment it off. And there's always that temptation to be like, man, we should just generate a whole bunch of Catholic synthetic data and do this again and see what happens. But we just, that was a very short conversation. I think it was more of a joke than anything else, because we just can't do that. I mean, in the end of the day, because Catholic theology and philosophy is always mediated through the human, we can't make up, theological insight. I mean, it has to come, I think, from the church, from human beings. And so that's a constraint that we just have to work within. This is one of the reasons why we decided to go and digitize that which is basically everything that's ever been said, from a Catholic theological philosophical perspective, as opposed to generating synthetic data. Because this is a constraint we take very seriously. And I don't, based on the conversations I've had with bishops and others, I think if they knew that we were doing that, I think that would be a real problem for them. I mean, a large part of my job is kind of traveling around and listening to them and finding out, well, what are your concerns? And how can we mitigate those concerns? And I think right now the fact that everything our AI says is grounded in a source document, and when it's generalizing, it's typically doing it from a source document, gives them great confidence. And if our AI was playing jazz a little bit too often, you could see. Very early on, this happened. If it swings and misses, someone's going to post it on social media. That's going to go viral, and the next thing you know, trust in Magisterium AI has been shattered. So that's something we take pretty seriously.
If one of our central duties as Catholics is to search for the truth, because the truth will set us free, I fail to see how synthetic data can be reflective of the truth. It might be true accidentally, but that would not be a truth I would like to follow.
Fantastic. Well, I think the panelists are going to stay around a little bit longer if you guys want to come down to ask some final questions, but we want to give a big round of applause to Father Kenny Yang, Jen Copestake, Father David Nazar, Matthew, Father Jean, and Father Michael for this wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.